Well, I'm pleased to say I'm joined now by leading economist Chris Richardson. Chris, great to see you as always. Thank you very much for your time. Now, you've written a fascinating piece in the Fin Review where you lay out how the tax pie, if you like, has changed in Australia. You make the point that families are getting less and the tax man is getting more. Can you explain this to us?
Yeah, budgets move all the time. And we tend to assume they move because politicians have made decisions. The main thing, however, that shifts them around is the everything else. And three big things, war, migration, inflation, have all had a big impact. Inflation in particular, it does exactly what you just mentioned. It takes money from families and it gives it to governments. Migration means there's more people we can tax, so that gives extra money to the federal government. And war pushed up the price of a bunch of things that Australia sells to the world, including coal, and again, that gave more money to the budget. That's basically why you have seen a budget in surplus, that combination of war, migration and inflation, delivering the government a lot more dollars than Treasury had expected.
Look, we've seen data today that the government spending blew out to $195 billion in the September quarter on the back of rebates, handouts and pay hikes. How problematic is this spending pattern?
Well, there has been a big shift in recent years, starting with the feds, increasingly, as you note, with the states towards spending more. And that's a change in the National Social Compact. That's, what governments are. We tax workers, we tax businesses, we spend that on the young and the old and the sick and the poor. And that combination has changed in recent years. Some things in particular, much more expensive. The NDIS is a good example. But we'd also, as a nation, promised ourselves a variety of things in things like aged care that we hadn't been properly funding under governments of all stripes. That combination increasingly catching up with us.
We've seen analysis in the past week really about how household disposable income is declining rapidly in Australia. We're not comparing favourably with other countries around the world. Why is this the case?
It's been a bigger hit here. Our fight against inflation deliberately has been slower than you've seen elsewhere in the world. The intent has been to make sure we keep unemployment as low as we can as we fight inflation. But a slow fight against inflation is an expensive one. It moves wages further behind prices. Again, inflation helps governments at the cost of families. It keeps interest rates higher for longer, and we now have a lot of debt. That combination means we've got a pretty big hit to living standards here in Australia. Data out tomorrow should start to show the beginnings of a rebound. The tax cut and the energy rebates, come with a variety of effects, but they do help our standard of living, and you'll see that in tomorrow's numbers.
Chris, in your view, is the Albanese government doing enough to fight inflation?
No, I don't think so. And to be fair, that fight is and mostly should be with the Reserve Bank. But the International Monetary Fund says if governments want to help their central banks fight inflation, then governments need to cut spending and raise taxes. Or in other words, if inflation is a problem of too much money chasing too little stuff, governments can help by taking money out of the system. Instead, most governments around the world, but particularly here in Australia, are doing the opposite. Big tax cuts, big increases in spending. That isn't helping the fight for the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, and we're probably going to see even more pre-election spending as we get closer to the campaign, and Albanese's falling in the polls. He's going to feel the need to buy back votes. Chris Richardson, appreciate your time.